What truly separates the great leaders from the rest? Is it raw intelligence, charisma, or perhaps an uncanny ability to predict the future? For centuries, we've marveled at the brilliance of Roman generals who seemed to possess an almost supernatural gift for strategy. They commanded legions across impossible terrain, turned certain defeat into stunning victory, and built an empire that would shape the course of human history. But what if their greatest weapon wasn't found on any battlefield map or in any tactical manual? What if their real advantage was something far more profound, something happening entirely within their own minds? The Stoic philosophers understood something that modern science is only now beginning to fully appreciate. Victory begins in the mind long before it manifests on the battlefield. These Roman generals didn't just study warfare, they mastered their own thinking. Through deliberate cognitive shifts, they transformed uncertainty into opportunity, fear into focus, and chaos into clarity. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled Rome even as he fought its wars, captured this perfectly when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. This wasn't just philosophical musing, it was the operating system for some of history's most brilliant tactical minds. Today, we're going to explore 25 specific mental shifts that gave these leaders their extraordinary edge. These aren't abstract concepts, they're practical, powerful cognitive tools that you can apply to your own challenges, whether you're leading a team, building a business, or simply navigating life's complexities. We'll discover how Stoic principles helped generals maintain clarity when surrounded by chaos, make rational decisions under extreme pressure, and turn obstacles into advantages. These ancient techniques remain stunningly relevant for modern leadership and personal resilience, offering timeless wisdom for anyone seeking to cultivate greater mental strength and strategic brilliance. This journey into the Roman military mind might just change how you approach your own battles, both great and small. The very first and perhaps most vital mental shift these commanders mastered was a profound understanding of what they could truly influence and what lay completely beyond their command. This Stoic principle, known as the dichotomy of control, became the bedrock of their tactical mindset. The philosopher Epictetus, whose teachings were studied by many educated Romans, framed it with stunning clarity. Some things are within our power while others are not. For a general on the ancient battlefield, this wasn't an abstract idea, it was a matter of life and death for thousands of soldiers. They could control the discipline of their legions, the thoroughness of their scouting reports, the quality of their formations, and their own rational decisions in the heat of combat. But they held no power over the weather suddenly turning a field to mud, the unexpected arrival of enemy reinforcements, or the morale of the opposing army. Wasting precious mental energy, focus, or time on these external factors was not just inefficient, it was a catastrophic strategic error. The brilliant general focused his entire being like a laser on the sphere of his own actionable choices. Imagine a commander like Gaius Marius leading a campaign deep into unfamiliar territory. A sudden, violent storm washes out the planned route of march, bogging down supply wagons and soaking his troops. A reactive, emotional leader might rage against the sky, lament his terrible luck, and allow frustration to cloud his judgment. A Stoic-trained general, however, would immediately accept the new reality. The storm itself was outside his control, but his response to it was entirely within his grasp. He would calmly assess the situation, redirect his engineers to repair the route, order the troops to make camp and dry their gear, and send out new scouts to find an alternative path. His energy flows entirely into solutions, not into complaints about the problem. This mental discipline created an incredible advantage, unshakable composure. While others were distracted and demoralized by chaos, the Stoic general remained focused, adaptable, and effective. He wasn't ignoring the chaos, he was simply refusing to let it dictate his internal state or his next move. This principle invites a powerful personal reflection. In your own life, where are you spending your finite energy and focus? How much mental space is consumed by things you cannot change? The traffic jam, a past mistake, another person's opinion, the overall state of the economy. What decisive actions could you take if you redirected all that wasted effort toward what you can actually influence? Your preparation, your attitude, your next step, your chosen response. Beyond the crucial understanding of control lay an even more subtle mental skill, the art of objective judgment. For a Roman commander, the battlefield was a swirling vortex of incomplete information, rumors, and potential threats. How they interpreted these raw impressions, what the Stoics called fantasiae, literally shaped their reality and determined their fate. Marcus Aurelius dedicated significant space in his private meditations to this very challenge, urging himself to constantly strip away the layers of value judgment and emotional storytelling to see events for what they truly were, bare and simple. He wrote, "Take away your opinion about what seems to give you pain, and you stand yourself upon the surest ground." This wasn't about becoming cold or unfeeling. It was about achieving radical clarity. A scout's report of dust clouds on the horizon wasn't automatically the approach of a vast enemy force. It was simply dust clouds on the horizon. The panicked shout from a sentry wasn't necessarily a breach in the lines. It was a sound that required calm verification. The Stoic general trained himself to receive these initial impressions without immediately accepting them as absolute truth. He would pause, examine the evidence, consider alternative explanations, and only then form a judgment. Consider the experience of a young, less disciplined legate on his first independent command. Camped for the night, his scouts report movement in a nearby forest. Fueled by anxiety and the desire to prove himself, his mind instantly leaps to the worst-case scenario, an ambush. His fear colors the report, amplifying the threat. He might order a costly and disruptive nighttime mobilization of his entire force, exhausting his men to face a threat that turns out to be a herd of deer, or worse, he might launch a preemptive attack that actually triggers the very conflict he feared. Now, imagine a general steeped in Stoic practice receiving that same report. The initial jolt of adrenaline is acknowledged but not obeyed. He applies what the philosopher Epictetus called the Discipline of Assent, refusing to immediately agree with the frightening impression. He asks clarifying questions: how many scouts saw it, from what distance, what was the pattern of the movement, could it be animals, or perhaps just the wind in the trees? He separates the observable facts from the terrifying story his mind wants to tell. By withholding immediate judgment, he avoids a rash decision, conserves his army's energy, and maintains strategic flexibility. This mental shift transforms him from a reactor into a true perceiver. He understands that his primary battlefield isn't the field itself, but the landscape of his own mind. His most dangerous enemy was often not the one across the valley, but the internal one of bias, assumption, and fear. This practice of objective judgment is perhaps more relevant today than ever, in a world saturated with information designed to trigger our emotional responses. Think about the last time you received a worrying email, saw a startling headline, or heard a piece of second-hand gossip. How quickly did your initial impression, colored by worry or anger, solidify into what you believed was an undeniable truth. How often has that emotional judgment led to a reaction you later regretted? The Roman general's lesson is that between the event and our response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our judgment, and in our judgment lies our freedom and our ultimate effectiveness. But this mental preparation went far deeper than just accepting what they couldn't control or seeing things clearly. The most forward-thinking Roman commanders engaged in a proactive and remarkably powerful cognitive exercise known as premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. This wasn't about pessimism or fearful worrying. It was a systematic form of mental inoculation. By deliberately envisioning potential setbacks, disasters, and worst-case scenarios in vivid detail, they stripped those future events of their emotional shock and paralyzing power. The philosopher Seneca, who served as an advisor to the Emperor Nero, championed this practice. He advised, "We should project our thoughts ahead of us at every turn and have in mind every possible eventuality instead of only the usual course of events." For a general, the usual course of events was a clean victory, but the Stoic knew that fortune was fickle and battlefields were chaotic. So, in the quiet of his tent before a campaign, he wouldn't just visualize a triumphant parade. He would mentally walk through the terrifying possibilities. He would imagine his cavalry being routed on the flanks. He would picture his supply lines being cut by raiders. He would feel, in his mind, the sudden panic that would ripple through the ranks if the enemy unveiled a new, terrifying weapon. This rigorous mental rehearsal served a crucial purpose. It transformed the unknown into the familiar. When a crisis inevitably did occur, it wasn't a shocking, unprecedented catastrophe that triggered panic. It was an event he had already faced and overcome 100 times in the theater of his own mind. Because he had pre-lived the emotional turmoil, he could now access a state of calm readiness. His cognitive resources were freed up not for dealing with shock, but for executing solutions. History provides a potent example in the campaign of Publius Scipio Africanus against Hannibal. Before the decisive Battle of Zama, Scipio didn't just hope for the best. He spent days mentally preparing for everything that could go wrong. He envisioned his war elephants, a new asset he had acquired, potentially being frightened by the trumpets and turning to stampede through his own lines. He pictured Hannibal's veteran corps holding firm while his own newer recruits might waver. This forethought wasn't wasted anxiety, it was strategic preparation. When the battle commenced and Hannibal's elephants actually charged, they were met not with panic but with a pre-planned response. Scipio's men, having been drilled for this exact scenario, simply parted their lines, creating channels that funneled the terrified beasts harmlessly to the rear. The general's composure, born from having already weathered this storm in his imagination, allowed for a rapid, calm pivot that turned a potential disaster into a tactical non-event. His mind was ready, so his army was ready. This ancient practice holds immense power for navigating modern challenges far beyond the battlefield. Consider a crucial business presentation. How often does the mere thought of a technical failure or a challenging question from the audience spike our anxiety? Now, apply premeditatio malorum. Instead of hoping everything goes perfectly, sit down and mentally walk through the obstacles. Visualize the projector failing. Feel the momentary embarrassment. Then see yourself calmly switching to a backup plan or speaking without slides. Imagine someone aggressively questioning your data. Hear the question, feel the flush of defensiveness, and then watch yourself responding with poise and facts. By pre-living these difficulties, you drain them of their power to derail you in the moment. When you've already confronted the fear, the actual event feels manageable, even familiar. So bring this Stoic exercise to a challenge you're facing right now. How could envisioning the specific obstacles, the potential failures, and the worst-case outcomes actually help you face that difficulty with greater composure and resilience? What solutions and backup plans might emerge from this clear-eyed look at what could go wrong? By welcoming these thoughts in advance, you aren't inviting disaster. You are building an inner fortitude that ensures no external event can ever truly take you by surprise. This profound embrace of reality, of accepting and even loving one's fate, represents the next monumental cognitive leap in the Stoic general's mind. This is the principle of Amor Fati, a Latin phrase that translates to a love of one's fate. While the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche would later popularize the term, its heart and soul beat firmly within Roman Stoic practice. It is the ultimate evolution beyond mere acceptance. It's not just tolerating what happens, it's actively welcoming it, not in a passive, resigned way, but with the fierce conviction that every event, especially the difficult and unexpected ones, contains the raw material for our growth and ultimate advantage. For a military commander, this mindset was a strategic superpower. Setbacks were not merely to be endured, they were to be studied, absorbed, and used as a whetstone to sharpen strategy and resolve. A defeat was not a final verdict, but a painful yet invaluable lesson written in blood and soil, offering insights no victory ever could. Consider the legendary campaign of Quintus Fabius Maximus against the Carthaginian general Hannibal. After Hannibal's forces annihilated multiple Roman armies at the battles of Trebia and Lake Trasimene, the strategic situation was dire. Panic gripped Rome. The conventional military wisdom, driven by wounded pride and a thirst for swift vengeance, demanded another massive, head-on confrontation to crush the invader. But Fabius, appointed as dictator, saw the situation with stoic clarity. He practiced Amor Fati on a grand strategic scale. He loved the reality of the situation, however unpleasant. Hannibal was a tactical genius on an open battlefield, and Roman pride was its own worst enemy. Instead of railing against this truth, he embraced it wholly. He loved the fate that gave him a seemingly weaker hand because it forced a brilliant, unconventional strategy. He refused to engage Hannibal directly. Instead, he shadowed the Carthaginian army, harassing its supply lines, cutting off foraging parties, and using the rugged Italian terrain itself as a weapon. His tactics earned him the scornful nickname Cunctator, the Delayer, but Fabius loved that fate too. He understood that the delay was not weakness, it was the precise application of strength required by the circumstance. His strategy drained Hannibal's momentum, protected Roman cities, and gave Rome time to rebuild its strength. He transformed a massive obstacle, the genius of Hannibal and the shame of previous defeats, into the very thing that saved the Republic. He didn't just make the best of a bad situation. He recognized that the so-called bad situation was the only situation, and within it lay the perfect path to eventual victory. This transformative shift in perspective turns the entire world into a collaborator. An unexpected storm is no longer an enemy. It becomes an ally that can hide your movements or bog down a pursuing force. A treacherous mountain pass is not an impediment but a force multiplier that funnels a larger enemy into a vulnerable column. A betrayal by a supposed ally clears away illusion and reveals the true landscape of loyalty, allowing for clearer planning. The Stoic general, through Amor Fati, engages in a constant alchemy of the mind, turning every piece of leaden misfortune into strategic gold. He asks not, "Why is this happening to me?" but "How can I use this for my purpose?" This reframing is an active, creative process. It requires looking at the event, stripping away the initial layer of emotional judgment, the disappointment, the anger, the fear, and searching with relentless curiosity for the hidden leverage point within it. This ancient practice invites a deeply personal application in our modern lives. far from the dust of ancient battlefields. We all face our own versions of defeat and unexpected setbacks, a project that fails at work, a plan that falls apart, a personal goal that seems suddenly out of reach. The natural human reaction is frustration, disappointment, and a desire to distance ourselves from the event. But the Stoic asks a different question, one of profound power. Can you find the value in that recent setback? Can you, like Fabius, love the fate that delivered it to you? Perhaps that failed project revealed a critical flaw in your team's communication that you can now fix. Perhaps the cancelled plan frees up time and energy for a better opportunity you hadn't seen. Perhaps the personal rejection steers you away from a path that wasn't truly right for you and toward one that is. Amor Fati is the decision to not just heal the wound, but to treasure the scar for the strength and wisdom it represents. It is the conscious choice to believe that everything that happens is somehow right for you, that it fits the narrative of your life not as an error, but as essential dialogue, and that within every obstacle lies not just a lesson, but an invitation to become a more resilient, creative, and complete version of yourself. This profound reorientation of values represents perhaps the most radical cognitive shift of all, one that placed ultimate victory not on the battlefield, but within the soul of the commander. For the Stoic general, true success was not measured by territorial gains, plunder, or even the defeat of an enemy army. The ultimate measure, the sole good worth pursuing, was virtue, the unwavering integrity of one's character, the courage to do what was right, and the wisdom to know the difference. External outcomes were classified as preferred indifference in Stoic philosophy. They were nice to have, but they held no inherent moral value. A triumph achieved through deceit, cruelty, or the sacrifice of one's principles was not a victory at all, it was the deepest form of defeat. The Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus, whose lectures were attended by many in the Roman elite, powerfully encapsulated this idea. The ruler who is just and good and fears to do wrong is a living law and is himself a kingdom and a state. This wasn't abstract idealism, it was a practical leadership principle. A general who was himself a living law of justice and discipline inspired a different kind of loyalty in his troops, one based on respect and trust, not just fear. This moral authority became a tangible strategic asset, fostering a cohesion and resilience that no amount of forced obedience could ever match. We see this principle enacted in a difficult, and to a modern audience perhaps counterintuitive, choice, the honorable retreat. Imagine a Roman force perhaps outnumbered or caught in an unfavorable position. A desperate, all-or-nothing charge might result in a bloody, Pyrrhic victory, saving the commander's pride at the cost of thousands of his soldiers' lives. Alternatively, a dishonorable tactic, such as breaking a sworn truce to massacre an enemy during negotiations, could secure a swift, easy win. The conventional, outcome-obsessed mind might see these as valid, if ugly, paths to success. But the Stoic general, whose internal compass was calibrated to virtue alone, would see only failure in these options. His calculus was different, a retreat that preserved his army's strength and his own honor, even if it meant temporary scorn from politicians in Rome, was a virtuous action. It demonstrated wisdom in recognizing a losing battle, courage in facing the criticism that would follow, and justice in valuing the lives of his men over his personal glory. This was a victory of character, even if the maps showed a loss of ground. History, though often written by the victors, preserves echoes of such leaders. A general like Lucius Aemilius Paulus, who famously fell at the catastrophic Roman defeat at Cannae, was remembered not for his loss but for his valor and his refusal to flee the field, choosing to die with his men in accordance with his duty. He secured a different kind of immortality, one of honor. This commitment to virtue created a powerful, self-reinforcing cycle. By prioritizing integrity over immediate results, the general built a reputation for trustworthiness that could lure enemies into peaceful settlements without further bloodshed. His courage, demonstrated in making the hard but right choice, became a legend that preceded him, sometimes causing opposing forces to lose heart before the first spear was thrown. His wisdom in avoiding needless battles conserved the empire's most precious resource, its citizens. In the long arc of strategy, virtue was not a handicap, it was the most sophisticated weapon in his arsenal. This ancient standard forces a deeply personal and uncomfortable question in our modern world, which often celebrates results with little scrutiny of the methods used to achieve them. We are frequently tempted to cut corners, to shade the truth, to prioritize expediency over principle because the desired outcome seems so vital. The Stoic challenge is to invert that calculus. Ask yourself, when did you last prioritize your ethics over a desired outcome? Was it choosing honesty in a situation where a small lie would have been easier? Was it walking away from a profitable deal because the terms felt exploitative? Was it defending an unpopular colleague because it was the right thing to do, even though it offered no social reward? These are the daily battles where we exercise our own virtue. The Roman general's lesson is that these small, often invisible victories of character are the only ones that truly matter. They are the deposits we make into our own integrity, building an inner fortress that no external failure can ever breach. A life lived with virtue is, by the Stoic definition, a successful life, regardless of the trophies collected along the way. Amidst the shouting of orders and the clashing of swords, the most effective Roman commanders possessed a unique ability to momentarily detach themselves from the immediate fray and adopt a much wider vantage point. This cognitive shift, often referred to as taking the view from above, was a powerful Stoic exercise in gaining perspective. It involved the mental discipline to rise above the chaos of the present moment, to visualize the battlefield not from the muddy ground where men were fighting and dying, but from a hypothetical point high in the sky. From this elevated position, the swirling melee of combat shrank into a comprehensible pattern. The general could see the entire layout of the land, the movement of entire units, and the interplay of forces as if observing a game board. This wasn't an act of cold detachment, but one of profound strategic clarity. The screams of individual soldiers faded into the overall din of the army, allowing the commander to make decisions based on the macro situation, not micro panics. Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who often commanded his legions from the front, frequently practiced this meditation. In his writings, he urged himself to constantly zoom out, to see human affairs from a cosmic perspective. He would remind himself that the entire Earth was but a point in the vastness of the universe, and even the most sprawling empire was a fleeting moment in the expanse of time. This wasn't meant to diminish his efforts, but to contextualize them. By understanding the true scale of things, the petty squabbles, the temporary setbacks, and the immediate pressures lost their overwhelming power. This cosmic perspective granted him the emotional equilibrium to make calm, long-term decisions even when surrounded by short-term chaos. We can see this principle in action through a commander like Gaius Julius Caesar during his grueling campaign in Gaul. Facing a vast coalition of tribes, Caesar's legions were often stretched thin, engaged in multiple small conflicts across a huge territory. A lesser leader might have been consumed by putting out each individual fire, rushing from one crisis to the next until his forces were exhausted and vulnerable. But Caesar consistently demonstrated this view from above. During a particularly tense moment, with reports arriving of rebellions in the north and an ambush wiping out a supply convoy in the east, his officers might have expected a reactionary response, to immediately march to the site of the latest disaster. Instead, Caesar would pause. He would mentally ascend above the map of Gaul. From this strategic altitude, he could see that losing a single convoy, while painful, was not a campaign-ending event. He could see that the rebellion in the north, though loud, was isolated and could be contained by a loyal allied tribe. His real objective, the long-term goal, was the pacification of the entire region and the demonstration of Roman invincibility. This broader view revealed that the greatest immediate threat was actually a different tribe massing its forces in the south, a move that could cut his entire army off from its supply routes back to Rome. By keeping his focus on this larger strategic picture, he avoided the trap of tactical reactivity. He made the calm, calculated decision to let the minor setbacks burn themselves out, while he concentrated his main force on the true center of gravity, decisively defeating the southern threat. This move, which might have seemed counterintuitive to those mired in the immediate crises, ultimately secured his entire position in Gaul. This practice is a powerful antidote to the modern condition of being constantly in the weeds, overwhelmed by an endless stream of emails, notifications, and daily emergencies. We become the soldier in the chaotic battle, reacting to every shout and clash, our attention fractured and our stress levels soaring. The Stoic general's lesson is to periodically become the commander who climbs the hill to survey the entire field. How would applying this view from above change your approach to a problem you're currently grappling with? If you mentally rose above your desk, your office, or even your industry, what would you see? That urgent deadline might shrink in significance when viewed against the backdrop of your 5-year career goals. A frustrating disagreement with a colleague might transform from a personal conflict into a simple misalignment of departmental objectives when seen from the higher perspective of the company's overall mission. The constant pressure of daily tasks might reorganize itself into a clear hierarchy of what truly drives long-term success versus what is merely noisy, busy work. This cognitive shift doesn't make the details unimportant. It simply allows you to see which details actually matter. It grants you the clarity to stop reacting to every spark and instead focus your energy on building the firebreak that protects the entire forest. By regularly practicing this mental ascent, you reclaim your agency, trading the anxiety of the immediate for the calm authority of the strategic. While the view from above provided strategic perspective, another profound mental shift rooted the Roman general firmly in the urgency of the present moment, a practice known as Memento Mori, the remembrance of death. Far from a morbid fixation, this was a vital Stoic exercise designed to instill unparalleled clarity, purpose, and decisiveness. The philosopher Seneca, who served as an advisor to the Emperor Nero, captured its power perfectly in a letter to a friend. Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. The one who puts the finishing touches on their life each day is never short of time. For a military commander, this was not abstract advice. Each dawn could be his last, each battle his final command. This stark awareness did not paralyze him with fear, it liberated him from it. By fully accepting the inevitability of his own end, he was freed from the trivial worries and procrastination that plague those who believe they have unlimited time. The shadow of death sharpened his senses, clarified his priorities, and lent a fierce intensity to his actions. He understood that the only time he truly possessed to enact his will, to demonstrate his virtue, and to secure his legacy was the present moment. This cognitive practice had a direct and tangible impact on military decision-making. A general who internalized Memento Mori was immune to the dangerous allure of delay. He could not afford to wait for perfect intelligence, for ideal weather, or for his troops to feel perfectly ready. He understood that inaction itself was a choice, and often the most risky one. Procrastination, in his eyes, was not merely inefficient, it was a betrayal of his duty. This urgency fueled a bias toward action, but it was a calculated, purposeful action, not a reckless one. It was the action of a man who knew his account of time was perpetually running low, and who was determined to spend each remaining coin on what truly mattered. History offers a powerful example in the actions of the Roman general Lucius Junius Brutus, one of the first consuls of the Roman Republic. According to legend, Brutus discovered a conspiracy to restore the exiled tyrannical kings to power, a plot that involved his own two sons. The Stoic ideal, reinforced by the constant reminder of life's brevity, demanded absolute commitment to the Republic's survival over personal affection. Understanding that delay could mean the end of Roman liberty and that his own life was a small price to pay for its defense, Brutus acted with terrifying swiftness and resolve. He ordered the arrest, trial, and execution of the conspirators, including his sons. His decisive action, however harsh it seems, was born from a place of profound clarity about what was at stake and the limited time he had to protect it. He could not postpone justice for fear of personal grief. The moment demanded absolute courage. This practice transformed the general's relationship with risk and opportunity. He became more willing to make bold, decisive moves because he recognized that the cost of missed opportunities was permanent. A chance to rout the enemy, to secure a key alliance, or to inspire his men with a courageous act could not be saved for a later, more convenient date. That date might never arrive. This mindset cultivated a powerful presence and focus. In council, he listened more intently. On the march, he observed more keenly. In battle, he fought with complete concentration. Every experience was heightened and valued because it was potentially his last. This is the ultimate paradox of Memento Mori. By keeping the end of the story firmly in mind, one learns how to best inhabit and author each page. The general did not lead from a place of fear, but from a place of profound gratitude and responsibility for the fleeting moments he was given to command. This ancient discipline invites a deeply personal and immediate reflection, one that transcends the ancient world and speaks directly to the heart of modern life. We often operate under the silent assumption of tomorrow, deferring difficult conversations, postponing creative projects, and delaying acts of kindness or reconciliation. We tell ourselves we will get to it when we have more time, more money, or more courage. The Stoic reminder cuts through this self-deception. If today were your last, what would you do differently? Would you finally have that honest conversation you've been avoiding? Would you spend your time on that passion project instead of scrolling through endless content? Would you reach out to mend a broken relationship? Would you tell the people you love that you love them? The question isn't meant to provoke a frantic bucket list of experiences, but a quiet reassessment of priorities. It asks you to identify the gap between how you are actually spending your time and how you would spend it if you truly understood its finite value. The goal is to close that gap, to start living with the urgency, authenticity, and purpose that the remembrance of death so vividly inspires. This profound awareness of life's brevity naturally leads to another, more expansive cognitive shift, one that connected the Roman general not just to his own mortality, but to the entire web of life and strategy around him. This is the principle of sympathy, a profound understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. For the Stoic commander, the battlefield was not a sterile chessboard with isolated pieces. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of cause and effect, where his army, the enemy, the local population, the weather, and the very terrain were all threads in a single, intricate tapestry. To see the world this way was to cultivate a form of strategic empathy, a deep-seated ability to understand the motivations, needs, and limitations of every element in the system. This wasn't about sentimentality, it was about superior intelligence and predictive power. The general who grasped sympathy knew that to understand his enemy's actions, he first had to understand his enemy's mind, his stomach, and his circumstances. Marcus Aurelius frequently meditated on this universal connectedness, writing in his personal journal, "What brings benefit to the hive brings benefit to the bee." He saw the entire cosmos as a single, united entity, and human societies as smaller hives within it. A disruption in one part of the system inevitably created ripples throughout the whole. This philosophical view had a direct and practical military application. It allowed a general to anticipate his opponent's moves not by magic, but by logic and observation. Consider the campaign of a general operating in unfamiliar, hostile territory. A less insightful commander might see only a faceless enemy and a map to be conquered. But a leader steeped in the concept of sympathy would see a complex network of relationships. He would study the local tribes not merely as potential threats or allies, but as parts of the environmental puzzle. He would ask, what do these people need? Where do they get their water? Where are their sacred sites? What grievances do they hold against their current rulers or against each other? He would extend this same curious empathy to his direct adversary. He wouldn't just ask, where is the enemy army, but what does that army need to survive and function? He would think about their supply lines, the morale of their troops, their political backing from home, and the personal ambitions of their commander. This holistic understanding allowed for breathtakingly accurate predictions. For example, a Roman general might note that a key mountain pass was the only viable route for an enemy force to receive supplies from a friendly city-state. By understanding this interconnection, the enemy's need for food and the terrain's constraint on their options, he could accurately predict that the enemy would have to defend that pass at all costs. Instead of wasting his strength attacking their main fortified camp head-on, he could feint toward the camp while sending an elite detachment to seize the pass. By cutting the supply line, he wouldn't have to defeat the enemy army in a pitched battle. He could simply wait for hunger and discord to do the work for him. He defeated them by understanding their needs better than they did themselves. This principle also applied to the terrain itself. The Stoic general saw the landscape not as a passive backdrop, but as an active participant in the conflict. A river wasn't just a blue line on a map. It was a source of life, a barrier to movement, a psychological comfort for troops camped beside it, and a potential weapon if dammed and released. A forest provided concealment, but also limited formations and could hide ambushes. By seeing his army and the environment as interconnected, the general could use the land as a force multiplier, making his smaller force seem larger or channeling a larger enemy into a kill zone. This deep, empathetic reading of the entire strategic picture enemy, ally, terrain, and climate transformed the general from a mere tactician into a true strategist. He was no longer just fighting against an opponent. He was navigating a living system, using his understanding of its connections to create leverage and induce collapse with minimal effort. This ancient practice of seeing interconnections is perhaps more critical today than ever in our globally connected world. Whether in business, politics, or our personal lives, we are constantly navigating complex systems. A decision in one department affects another. A change in market trends impacts supply chains across the globe. A comment in a social circle alters relationships. How often do we make decisions while seeing only the isolated event, blind to the wider web of consequences? The Roman general's lesson is that our effectiveness is directly proportional to our ability to see these interconnections. How does understanding the links between your team's workload, another department's goals, and the company's overall mission improve a project plan? How does seeing the connection between a colleague's sharp email and the pressure they're under from their own manager change how you choose to respond? When you start to see the world as a network of interdependent relationships, your decisions become wiser, more compassionate, and infinitely more strategic. You stop creating unintended consequences and start creating intentional, positive ripple effects throughout your entire sphere of influence. This practice of interconnected thinking required a mind that was not only strategically agile, but also physically and mentally resilient, a toughness often forged through a deliberate and counterintuitive discipline, the voluntary embrace of hardship. In an empire known for its decadence and luxury, the most effective Roman generals actively engaged in what the Stoics called practicing poverty. This was not about embracing destitution, but about periodically subjecting oneself to voluntary discomfort to build an immunity to the softening effects of ease and to foster a powerful bond of shared experience with their troops. The philosopher Seneca, one of Rome's wealthiest men, was a vocal proponent of this idea. He would deliberately set aside a certain number of days each month to live on the cheapest bread, sleep on a hard pallet, and wear only his plainest tunic. He called these his practice days, explaining that their purpose was to prove to himself that his happiness and his character were not dependent on his external circumstances. For a man of Seneca's status, this was a radical exercise in self-reliance. He wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" This was mental and physical training of the highest order, a vaccine against the fear of loss and a bulwark against entitlement. For a military commander, this philosophy was a direct pipeline to battlefield effectiveness. A general who had voluntarily slept on the cold ground in the safety of his own villa would not be mentally broken by a night spent in a muddy field during a campaign. An officer who had trained himself to march long distances on meager rations would not become demoralized when supply lines were temporarily cut. This self-imposed hardship stripped away the layer of comfort that could insulate a leader from the brutal realities his soldiers faced every day. It cultivated a deep, visceral resilience that no amount of theoretical study could provide. The general who practiced poverty was not just playing at being tough, he was systematically dismantling his own vulnerabilities, ensuring that when fortune turned against him, his spirit would remain unbroken and his judgment clear. He understood that luxury was a subtle trap, lulling the mind into a false sense of security and creating dependencies that could be exploited by an adversary. By choosing to live simply, even for short periods, he maintained a state of constant readiness, a lean and hardened mindset that could endure deprivation and thrive on challenge. This principle found its ultimate expression not in isolation, but in shared experience. The most revered Roman generals were those who didn't just practice poverty in private, but who publicly shared the hardships of their common soldiers. This was a masterstroke of leadership that combined Stoic discipline with profound psychological insight. A legendary example is the conduct of Gaius Marius during his extensive military reforms and campaigns in the late 2nd century BC. Marius was a new man, not from the traditional aristocratic elite, and he connected with his legions on a level that more patrician commanders often could not. He was famously depicted eating the same coarse bread as his legionnaires, sleeping in the same simple tent, and marching alongside them under the weight of his own pack and equipment. This was not a political stunt, it was a genuine embodiment of Stoic virtue and strategic genius. By sharing their rations, he demonstrated that he would not let them go hungry. By sharing their march, he proved his physical endurance and his commitment to their shared mission. By sharing their hardships, he built a bond of mutual respect and loyalty that was far stronger than any discipline enforced by fear. His men knew that he would never ask them to endure something he was unwilling to endure himself. This created a level of unit cohesion and morale that made his legions virtually unstoppable. They fought not just for Rome or for pay, but for him, because he had earned their trust through shared sacrifice. This ancient practice of voluntary discomfort offers a powerful lens through which to examine our own modern lives, which are often engineered for maximum comfort and convenience. We have climate-controlled environments, endless entertainment at our fingertips, and food available for delivery at any hour. While these are marvels of progress, they can also quietly erode our resilience. We become so accustomed to ease that the slightest inconvenience, a slow internet connection, a delayed flight, a minor criticism, can trigger disproportionate frustration and stress. Our comfort zone becomes a cage, limiting our growth and making us psychologically fragile. The Stoic general's challenge is to periodically break out of that cage by choice, not by force. It's about asking a simple but profound question: what comfort could you temporarily give up to strengthen yourself? The answer will be different for everyone. It might be a digital detox, switching off the constant stream of notifications and entertainment for a weekend to reclaim your focus and attention. It might be a physical challenge, like taking a cold shower instead of a hot one, or walking instead of driving for short trips. It might be a dietary choice, opting for simple, nourishing food instead of indulgent takeout. The goal isn't to inflict misery, but to prove to yourself that you are more than your comforts. Each small act of voluntary discomfort is a repetition in the gym of the mind, building the muscle of resilience. It's a reminder that your happiness and your capabilities are not held hostage by external conditions. By willingly stepping into minor hardship, you build an inner fortitude that ensures you will never be defeated by the inevitable major hardships that life will eventually send your way. You become, like the Roman general, the commander of your own comfort, not its prisoner. This crucial mental discipline, known to the Stoics as the Discipline of Assent, represents a sophisticated form of cognitive gatekeeping. It is the practiced art of inserting a vital pause between an initial impression and your full endorsement of that impression as truth. For a Roman general whose every decision carried immense weight, mastering this pause was not a philosophical luxury, it was a tactical necessity for survival. The battlefield was a factory of rumors, misleading appearances, and panicked reports. A commander who immediately assented to every piece of information that reached him would be like a ship tossed by every wave, jerked from one course of action to another by the latest alarming update. The philosopher Epictetus, a former slave whose teachings on mental freedom resonated deeply with the Roman military ethos, provided the core instruction for this practice. He advised his students to never be carried away by the vividness of an appearance, but to always say to every initial impression, "You are just an appearance and not at all the thing you appear to be." This was the mental equivalent of a sentry challenging everyone who approached the gate, before granting entry to a thought and allowing it to influence his decisions. The general would demand its credentials. Imagine the scene at a command post during a tense campaign. A breathless scout stumbles into the general's tent, his face etched with panic. He reports seeing the glint of what must be thousands of enemy helmets in a distant forest, a massive force lying in ambush. The initial impression is powerful and terrifying. It carries the emotional weight of the scout's fear and the immediate, visceral image of a hidden army poised to strike. A reactive leader, one untrained in the discipline of assent, might instantly accept this report at face value. His mind would immediately leap to the worst-case scenario, triggering a flood of stress hormones and a rush to action. He might immediately order a full retreat, abandoning a strong position, or perhaps divert precious reserves to counter a threat that may not even exist. In doing so, he would have allowed a single, unchallenged impression to dictate the fate of his entire army. Now, witness the Stoic general at work. He receives the same report. He feels the same initial jolt of adrenaline. The Stoics never claimed to eliminate natural human physiological reactions, but then he engages the discipline. He creates that critical pause. He does not immediately assent to the idea that the glints in the forest are an enemy army. Instead, he holds the impression at arm's length for examination. He turns to the scout and begins asking calm, logical questions in that moment of suspended judgment. How far away was the forest? What was the angle of the sun? Could the glints have been sunlight reflecting off of wet leaves or a peculiar rock formation? How many scouts actually saw this? Did they hear the unmistakable sounds of a large mass of men, the clatter of arms, the lowing of oxen for supplies, the murmur of voices? By critically evaluating the appearance rather than blindly accepting it, the general avoids a catastrophic error. The subsequent investigation might reveal that the army was indeed a trick of the light, and the real threat is approaching from an entirely different direction. His delayed assent, his refusal to be carried away, saved his command from a costly and demoralizing mistake. This mental space between event and reaction is where true leadership and rational choice reside. This ancient practice is incredibly relevant in our modern world, which delivers a constant, overwhelming barrage of impressions designed to trigger immediate assent. A shocking headline, a dramatic email, a piece of office gossip, a critical comment on social media, each one arrives as a powerful appearance, demanding our immediate emotional agreement and reaction. We are constantly tempted to be the reactive general, mobilizing our emotional resources based on an unchallenged first impression. The discipline, then, is to become our own sentry. Where in your own life do you most need to institute this pause and slow down your judgments? Is it the moment you receive a frustrating message from a colleague, when your first impression is that they are being deliberately difficult? Could you pause to consider they might be under immense pressure from their own manager? Is it when you see a piece of news that confirms your deepest biases, and your immediate impulse is to share it without a second thought? Could you pause to check the source and consider alternative viewpoints? This Stoic exercise is not about promoting skepticism or inaction. It is about empowering intentional, considered action. It is the difference between being a puppet whose strings are pulled by every external event and being the puppeteer who decides which strings to pull and when. By mastering the discipline of assent, you reclaim sovereignty over your own mind, ensuring that your beliefs and subsequent actions are chosen by you, not forced upon you by an unchallenged appearance. This concept of the mind as an unassailable stronghold was perhaps the ultimate cognitive achievement for a Stoic general, a mental shift they called the inner citadel. Imagine the most formidable fortress ever constructed, walls so thick they shrug off the mightiest siege engines, gates so strong they cannot be forced, and a location so remote it exists beyond the reach of any invading army. Now transpose that image onto the human mind. This was the Stoic goal, to cultivate a core of mental resilience so absolute that no external event, no defeat, no betrayal, no personal loss, no physical pain could ever truly breach its defenses and shake one's virtue, judgment, or essential peace. The general's command tent might be in chaos, his army might be surrounded, and his personal fortunes might be crumbling, but within the inviolable walls of his own consciousness, he remained the calm, rational commander of his fate. Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who faced endless military and political crises, constantly fortified his own inner citadel through his private writings. He reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." For him, this wasn't a hopeful affirmation, it was a statement of tactical fact. The battlefield was unpredictable, but the landscape of his own thoughts was a territory he could absolutely govern. This inner fortress wasn't built from stone and mortar, but from practiced philosophy and unshakable principle. Its walls were constructed brick by brick through daily disciplines like the dichotomy of control, objective judgment, and the premeditation of evils. Each time the general chose to focus on his response rather than the external chaos, he added another layer to his defenses. Each time he stripped away emotional bias from a frightening report, he reinforced the gates. Each time he mentally rehearsed a disaster, he ensured his citadel was stocked with the supplies of courage and composure needed to withstand any siege. The goal was to achieve a state of apatheia, not apathy in the modern sense, but a state of being free from the destructive, misleading passions of overwhelming fear, rage, or desire that could cloud judgment. The general's inner citadel was a place of perfect clarity, where decisions were made based on reason, duty, and virtue, utterly insulated from the emotional storm raging outside. We see this principle tested to its absolute limit in the legendary stand of Gaius Mucius Scaevola, a story every Roman schoolboy knew. As the tale goes, during the early siege of Rome by the Etruscan king Lars Porsena, a young Roman noble named Mucius vowed to assassinate the enemy king to end the siege. His attempt failed, and he was captured and brought before Porsena's throne. The king, furious, threatened to burn Mucius alive unless he revealed everything he knew about Roman plans. In that moment, Mucius's life was entirely in the hands of his enemy. Externally, he was completely powerless, but internally, his Stoic training had built an impregnable citadel. To demonstrate his utter indifference to external threats and his absolute control over his own mind and body, he thrust his right hand into a sacrificial fire burning nearby and held it there without flinching until it was consumed. He then calmly told the stunned king that there were 300 other young Romans who had sworn the same oath to kill him, and that they would each try in turn. This breathtaking display of mental fortitude and voluntary sacrifice so awed Porsena that he not only released Mucius, who earned the nickname Scaevola, or left-handed, but he also began peace negotiations with Rome. Mucius's body was captured and in pain, but his inner citadel, his will, his courage, his commitment to his mission remained utterly unbreached. He turned certain death into a strategic victory through the sheer power of an unconquerable mind. This ancient ideal is not about becoming emotionless or detached from the world. It is about building a core of stability so resilient that you can engage fully with the world's chaos without being broken by it. It is the difference between a lamp placed outside in a storm, which is easily extinguished, and a lamp placed inside a sturdy lighthouse. It continues to shine and guide, completely unaffected by the hurricane raging against its windows. Your inner citadel is that lighthouse. The storms of life, professional setbacks, personal criticisms, health scares, financial pressures will forever beat against the glass. The Stoic goal is not to stop the storm, but to ensure that the light of your reason, your character, and your peace remains burning steadily within, providing guidance and warmth no matter how fierce the weather becomes. So, how can you begin to strengthen your own mental defenses today? You don't need a dramatic gesture like Mucius Scaevola's. you can start with the daily bricks and mortar of mental discipline. The next time you receive a stressful piece of news, instead of immediately reacting, take one deep breath and consciously retreat behind your walls. Ask yourself, what part of this situation can I actually control? This question is the foundation stone. When you feel a surge of anger or anxiety, pause before you assent to it. Examine it. Is this emotion based on an objective fact or a subjective story I'm telling myself? This critical examination reinforces your gates. And finally, spend a few moments each day in quiet mental preparation, considering what challenges the day might bring and how you would respond with virtue and strength. This is the ongoing work of fortification. Your inner citadel is not a birthright. It is a construction project that lasts a lifetime, built one conscious, rational choice at a time. This profound inner strength provided the foundation for the most defining quality of Stoic leadership, the ability to act not from fleeting impulse, but from a deep and unwavering sense of purpose. The Greeks had a precise word for this faculty, prohersis, meaning a deliberate choice, a moral will, or a commitment to action that is fully aligned with one's core values and reasoned judgment. For the Roman general, this was the crucial difference between being a mere reactor to external events and being the true author of his campaign. Every decision, from the grand strategic down to the mundane tactical, was filtered through this question: does this action align with my duty, my virtue, and the long-term good of Rome? The philosopher Epictetus, whose teachings were essentially a manual for achieving inner freedom, placed prohersis at the very center of his philosophy. He taught that our true self is not our body, our possessions, or our social standing, but our capacity for choice, our prohersis. He stated, "What then is the fruit of these doctrines? Precisely that which must be the fairest and most becoming for those who are truly educated: tranquility, fearlessness, and freedom." This freedom wasn't freedom from consequence, but the freedom to choose one's response with integrity, no matter the consequence. A general guided by prohersis might choose a difficult, dangerous course of action because it was right, while rejecting an easier, safer path because it was dishonorable. His actions were not dictated by the desire for glory, the fear of criticism, or the heat of anger, but by a cool, clear, and purposeful commitment to his principles. We can see this powerful dynamic in the conduct of a commander like Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus. According to legend, Cincinnatus was a former consul who had retired to a life of farming on his small plot of land, having fallen on hard times. When a powerful enemy tribe threatened Rome, the Senate, in desperation, sought him out and offered him absolute power as dictator to save the Republic. A man driven by impulse or ego might have seized the opportunity for personal glory and power, but Cincinnatus acted with prohersis. His purpose was not self-aggrandizement, it was service to the Republic he loved. He accepted the role not because he wanted it, but because it was his duty. With stunning efficiency, he organized the legions, defeated the enemy, and saved Rome. Then, in perhaps the most famous act of purposeful leadership in Roman history, he immediately resigned his immense absolute power and returned to his plow just 16 days after taking command. He did not cling to command, he had completed the task his values demanded of him. This deliberate, principled action, this alignment of deed with purpose, created a legend that echoed for centuries. It wasn't the victory itself that was so inspiring, it was the purposeful relinquishment of power that followed. It demonstrated to every Roman citizen that true leadership was about responsibility, not privilege, and that the ultimate purpose of power was to serve the common good and then let it go. His actions were a living lesson in prohersis, inspiring generations of Romans to value civic duty over personal gain. This clarity of purpose had a magnetic effect on the troops under a general's command. Soldiers are astute observers of character. They can sense when a leader is motivated by vanity or fear versus when he is guided by a genuine, unwavering principle. An army that believes its commander is acting with purpose, that every march, every deployment, every engagement is part of a coherent plan rooted in duty and honor, fights with a different level of confidence and commitment. They trust that their sacrifices have meaning beyond the immediate clash of arms. They see their generals sharing their risks, making hard choices based on reason, and keeping his word, and in return, they offer not just obedience but their full devotion. This transforms an army from a mere instrument of force into a cohesive, resilient extension of the general's will. The general's purposeful action becomes their purpose. His unwavering resolve becomes their courage. This ancient concept holds a stark mirror up to our modern lives, which are so often characterized by reactivity. We live in a world of constant notifications, endless demands on our attention, and immense social pressure to conform to the latest trend or opinion. It is incredibly easy to live on autopilot, allowing our actions to be dictated by the next email in the inbox, the next notification on our phone, or the expectations of those around us. We react to criticism with defensiveness, to opportunity with anxiety, to conflict with avoidance, without ever pausing to consult our own internal compass. The Stoic challenge is to interrupt this cycle of stimulus and response. It requires us to regularly ask ourselves a simple but profoundly difficult question, one that can reshape the trajectory of a day, a career, or a life. Are your actions at this very moment and in general driven by a deep-seated purpose, or are they merely reactions to the latest external pressure? Is your schedule a reflection of your true priorities, or a collection of responses to other people's agendas? When you face a difficult decision, do you choose the path that is easiest, most popular, or least likely to draw criticism? Or do you choose the path that aligns with who you truly aspire to be? Cultivating proherses means building a pause into your life, a sacred space between the event and your action where you can ask, what would my best self do here? It is the daily, conscious practice of moving from being a passenger on the bus of life to taking the wheel and steering deliberately toward a destination of your own choosing. This cultivated inner purpose was the bedrock for the most visible and impactful quality a Stoic general could project onto a chaotic battlefield, an unshakable equanimity. In the midst of screaming men, clashing steel, and the terrifying din of war, his calmness was not a passive state of relaxation. It was an active, potent tactical advantage. While others were swept away by a tide of fear or frenzy, the Stoic commander remained a still point of reason, a human anchor in the storm. This profound steadiness was not an innate personality trait gifted to a fortunate few. It was the direct result of relentless mental training, a hard-earned cognitive achievement. The philosopher Seneca, who witnessed the tumult of Nero's court, understood that true tranquility wasn't found by hiding from chaos, but by finding a way to stand firm within it. He wrote, "The mind must be made independent of external circumstances. It must have a strength of its own to abide within itself and gain its own approval." For a general, this inner approval came from knowing he had done everything within his power to prepare, that his reasoning was sound, his virtues intact, and his men well drilled. This self-trust created a deep reservoir of calm that no external event could drain. The practical effect of this equanimity on the battlefield was nothing short of transformative. An army is a single, interconnected organism that takes its emotional cues directly from its head, the commanding general. fear and panic are more contagious than any plague, and they can unravel the most disciplined formation in seconds. The general's composure acted as a psychological firebreak against this contagion, his steady voice issuing clear, measured orders amidst the roar of combat, his calm posture on horseback as he surveyed the lines, his unwavering gaze. These were not just symbols of leadership, they were active instruments of control. They communicated one powerful, reassuring message to every soldier who saw him. The situation is dire, but it is not beyond our command. Our leader is not panicking, therefore there must be a path through this. His calm was a lifeline that kept the entire army connected to its rational mind, preventing a tactical setback from spiraling into a catastrophic rout. A powerful historical illustration of this principle can be found in the conduct of the Byzantine general Belisarius during the siege of Rome by the Ostrogoths in the 6th century. Though later than the classical Roman era, Belisarius was a master of classical military strategy and embodied this Stoic ideal. His forces were drastically outnumbered, trapped within the massive Aurelian walls and facing a determined enemy. At one critical point, a key section of the wall was breached, and Gothic soldiers began pouring into the city. Panic exploded among the Byzantine troops and the civilian population. The sound of the enemy's shouts and the sight of the breach threatened to trigger a complete collapse. In that moment of supreme chaos, Belisarius did not retreat to a secure command post. He did the opposite. He galloped directly toward the breach. He dismounted, drew his sword, and stood squarely in the gap, not with a frenzied battle cry, but with a terrifying and complete calm. He didn't just fight, he became a living bulwark. His personal guard, inspired by his fearless composure, rallied to him and formed a disciplined shield wall. Belisarius's calm action, a direct projection of his inner equanimity, did what 1,000 shouted orders could not. It stopped the panic cold. It transformed a disorganized mob of fleeing soldiers back into a disciplined unit. They plugged the breach and repelled the attack, saving the city that day. His poise did not change the physical reality of the breach, but it completely altered the psychological reality of his army, and that made all the difference. This ancient practice of cultivating calm is not reserved for life and death struggles on literal battlefields. We each face our own version of daily chaos, the frantic pace of a demanding job, the overwhelming pressure of multiple deadlines, the sudden crisis in a personal relationship, or the constant, buzzing anxiety of the 24-hour news cycle. In these moments, we too have a choice: to be swept away by the emotional turbulence or to become the calm within it. The Stoic general's lesson is that this calm is a skill to be practiced, not a feeling to be waited for. So how can you begin to cultivate this equanimity in your own life? It starts with recognizing that the chaos around you does not mandate chaos within you. The next time you find yourself in a stressful situation, a high-stakes meeting that starts to go off the rails, a conflict with a loved one, a sudden problem that demands an immediate solution, pause for just one breath. In that breath, consciously separate the external event from your internal reaction. The problem is out there, your calm is in here. Your power lies not in controlling every aspect of the situation, but in controlling your response to it. By choosing to respond with measured clarity instead of reactive emotion, you do not just solve the problem more effectively, you become a source of stability for everyone else involved. You stop adding to the storm and start being the anchor. Your calm becomes your strategy, and your mind becomes your most powerful weapon. This remarkable ability to remain calm in chaos was the essential precondition for the next, even more creative cognitive leap: the art of transforming obstacles into the very fuel for victory. The Stoic general did not merely endure setbacks or difficult circumstances, he actively repurposed them, turning apparent liabilities into strategic assets with a kind of tactical alchemy. Where a conventional mind saw a barrier, the Stoic trained mind saw a hidden opportunity. This mindset was perfectly captured by Marcus Aurelius in his personal meditations, offering a simple yet profound reframe. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This was not optimistic wishful thinking. It was a directive for engaged, creative problem solving. An obstacle was not a stop sign but a detour sign, and sometimes the detour led to a far more advantageous destination than the original planned route. The general's creativity was not expressed in avoiding hardship, but in leveraging it, using the friction of the challenge to spark a more brilliant solution. This principle moved from philosophy to practice in countless ways on the ancient battlefield. A crippling supply shortage, for instance, could have demoralized an army and forced a retreat. But a resourceful general might use it as a catalyst for innovation. He could task his engineers with foraging for local alternatives, discovering new food sources or more efficient cooking methods that would later become standard practice. More strategically, he might use the appearance of a supply shortage as bait, feigning weakness to lure an overconfident enemy into a reckless attack on what they believed was a vulnerable camp, only to find it was a carefully laid trap. The obstacle of scarcity was thus transformed into the fuel for a clever ruse. Similarly, treacherous terrain, a dense forest, a steep mountain range, a wide river, was traditionally seen as a massive impediment to movement and communication. The standard approach was to go around it, often at great cost in time and energy. The Stoic general, however, would study the obstacle itself for its potential. That dense forest wasn't just a barrier, it was a perfect screen to conceal the movement of an entire legion, allowing for a surprise flanking maneuver. The steep mountain wasn't just exhausting to climb. Its heights offered a dominant vantage point for observing enemy formations, and its passes created natural choke points where a smaller force could ambush a larger one. A legendary example of this obstacle as fuel thinking is found in the campaigns of Julius Caesar, particularly during his civil war against Pompey. Facing Pompey's larger and more experienced forces at the Battle of Pharsalus, Caesar was in a strategically difficult position. His army was outnumbered and his supply lines were stretched. The obvious, expected tactic for a weaker force was to assume a defensive posture, dig in, and hope to weather the attack. But Caesar saw the obstacle of his smaller army not as a reason to defend, but as an opportunity to innovate offensively. He studied the battlefield and identified a key obstacle on Pompey's side: their reliance on highly disciplined but somewhat slow-moving heavy infantry. Caesar used this knowledge to fuel a devastating new tactic. He created a dedicated fourth line of elite infantry, held in reserve, a departure from standard Roman triple-line doctrine. When Pompey's cavalry, which vastly outnumbered Caesar's, launched a massive flanking attack, it seemed like the beginning of the end, but Caesar had anticipated this exact move. He didn't see the enemy cavalry as an unstoppable force. He saw their charge as momentum that could be used against them. He ordered his fourth line to not hold their ground, but to launch a surprise counter charge directly into the oncoming horsemen. He instructed his men to aim their javelins not at the riders, but at the faces of the horses and the riders themselves, a shocking and brutal tactic. The result was pandemonium. The Pompeian cavalry, expecting a routine flanking maneuver, was completely unprepared for this aggressive assault from infantry they didn't even know existed. The horses reared in panic, the formation broke, and the cavalry charge, Pompey's greatest advantage, collapsed in a chaotic rout. Caesar had taken the very obstacle that should have guaranteed his defeat. his numerical inferiority, and used it to craft a surprise that turned the battle. He used the enemy's strength as the fuel for their own downfall. The obstacle became the way. This practice of creative repurposing is a powerful tool for navigating the inevitable blockades of modern life. We all face our own versions of supply shortages and difficult terrain: a sudden budget cut at work, a key team member leaving, a new competitor emerging, or a personal goal that seems out of reach. The natural reaction is frustration and a sense of being blocked. The Stoic challenge is to pause in that moment of frustration and ask a different set of questions. Instead of "how do I get around this?" ask "how can I use this? What hidden advantage might lie within this constraint?" A budget cut can force a team to eliminate wasteful processes and discover far more efficient ways of operating. The departure of a key person can be a chance to cross-train other team members and build a more resilient, less siloed organization. A new competitor can force you to innovate and improve your own product in ways you never would have considered in a comfortable monopoly. The obstacle itself contains the seeds of the solution. It simply requires a shift in perspective to see them. So, look at a challenge you're facing right now. What obstacle can you repurpose today? Can that difficult client's endless objections be reframed as a free consulting session, revealing flaws in your proposal that you can now fix to make it stronger for everyone? Can a personal setback be the motivation you need to finally develop a new skill or healthy habit? The barrier isn't just something to be overcome. It is the very material you can use to build a better path forward. By embracing this Stoic shift, you stop fighting your circumstances and start using them, transforming every headwind into a source of propulsion. In the cacophony of war councils and the tense quiet before battle, the most insightful Roman commanders understood that strategic advantage often came not from what they said, but from what they were willing to hear. This cognitive shift, the profound art of strategic silence, was a disciplined practice of listening and observation that yielded more intelligence than any number of interrogations or boastful speeches. In a culture that celebrated powerful oratory, the Stoic general embraced the counterintuitive power of restraint, recognizing that a closed mouth and open ears were formidable weapons in their own right. This principle was deeply rooted in the broader Stoic virtue of moderation, particularly in speech. The Stoics warned incessantly against the dangers of gossip, idle talk, and hasty pronouncements, seeing them as leaks of vital energy and focus. Seneca advised, "Be silent for the most part, or say only what is necessary and in few words." For a military leader, this wasn't just philosophical advice, it was a tactical imperative. Every unnecessary word spoken in a command tent was a potential leak. Every opinion voiced too early could stifle the candor of subordinates. The general's silence created a vacuum that others felt compelled to fill, often with the very information he needed to hear. This discipline extended far beyond mere secrecy. It was an active, engaged form of listening, a relentless gathering of intelligence through patient observation. A Stoic general would spend hours studying the enemy camp from a distant ridge, not just counting tents, but noting the patterns of smoke from their fires, the frequency of supply wagons arriving, the discipline of their sentries, and even the sounds that carried across the valley. He understood that the enemy, through their actions and their own unguarded chatter, would eventually reveal their plans, their morale, and their vulnerabilities. He learned to read the landscape of conflict like a text, deciphering meaning from the subtlest of signs. This required immense patience, a quality that runs counter to the modern stereotype of the impulsive, action-oriented military leader. The general who had mastered silence was willing to wait for the perfect moment, allowing the situation to develop until the enemy made a critical mistake or revealed a fatal flaw. His stillness was not passivity, it was a coiled spring, gathering potential energy for a decisive strike at the most opportune time. A classic historical example that embodies this principle is the conduct of the Republican general Fabius Maximus during his campaign against Hannibal. Facing a commander of unparalleled tactical brilliance, Fabius knew that a direct confrontation was tantamount to suicide. Instead of boasting of his intentions or being goaded into a rash attack by political opponents in Rome, he embraced a strategy of masterful inactivity and observation, a strategy that required profound silence. He shadowed Hannibal's army closely but refused to engage, a tactic that earned him the derogatory nickname Cunctator, the delayer, but Fabius's silence was strategic. By dogging Hannibal's movements and observing his army with relentless patience, he learned everything about his enemy. He noted how the Carthaginian army foraged, how it set up camp, how its diverse mercenary units interacted. This silent observation allowed him to identify critical weaknesses in Hannibal's extended supply lines and to expertly use the Italian terrain to harass and weaken the invaders without ever risking a major battle. His silence and patience provided the intelligence needed to craft a strategy that ultimately saved Rome, proving that the most powerful response is sometimes no audible response at all. This ancient practice of strategic silence offers a powerful corrective to our modern world, which often mistakes constant communication for effective leadership and values the loudest voice in the room as the most authoritative. We are conditioned to fill every pause in a conversation, to immediately defend ourselves against criticism, to promote our ideas relentlessly, and to broadcast our opinions on every platform. This incessant noise can be a tremendous strategic liability. It prevents us from truly listening, from absorbing the full context of a situation, and from understanding the underlying motivations of those around us. The Roman general's discipline invites a moment of profound self-reflection. When in your own life might silence serve you better than words, perhaps in a heated negotiation, where saying nothing after a proposal has been made can create uncomfortable pressure for the other side to improve their offer. Perhaps in a team meeting where holding back your own opinion initially encourages junior members to share more candid and potentially valuable insights. Maybe during a personal conflict, where choosing to listen rather than immediately defend yourself allows you to truly hear the other person's grievance and to escalate the tension. In these moments, silence is not a void or a weakness. It is a space for gathering intelligence, for demonstrating confidence, and for choosing your actions with deliberate precision rather than reacting with unthinking emotion. It is the ultimate expression of having nothing to prove and everything to observe. This profound discipline of silence was a close ally to another vital cognitive shift, the strategic cultivation of patience. For the Stoic general, patience was never a synonym for passivity or indecision. It was a form of active, disciplined timing. It was the razor-sharp understanding that the right action taken at the wrong moment becomes the wrong action, and that often the most powerful move one can make is to consciously and deliberately choose to wait. This was the art of allowing a situation to fully ripen, of permitting an enemy to make the first mistake, of gathering strength while appearing dormant. The philosopher Seneca, who provided so much guidance to the Roman elite, captured this strategic value of delay with his characteristic clarity. He wrote, "Time heals what reason cannot," suggesting that the mere passage of time often resolves conflicts and reveals opportunities that frantic action only obscures. A general rushing headlong into every potential engagement would quickly exhaust his army and himself, frittering away his strength on minor skirmishes while missing the decisive moment that could end the entire war. The Stoic commander, by contrast, husbanded his resources, both material and mental, with the care of a master jeweler, knowing that his most precious asset was not his number of legions, but his capacity for perfect timing. We can see this principle of strategic patience enacted on a grand scale in the early career of Gaius Julius Caesar, years before he became the dictator of Rome. During his conquest of Gaul, Caesar faced a united rebellion led by the charismatic chieftain Vercingetorix. The Gallic forces adopted a brilliant strategy of avoiding pitched battles and instead retreating to heavily fortified strongholds, forcing the Romans into long, costly sieges. The most famous of these was the Siege of Alesia. Vercingetorix, with his main army, occupied the fortified town atop a high plateau, while a massive Gallic relief force, said to number in the hundreds of thousands, was marching to break the siege. Caesar's legions were caught in a desperate position, trapped between the fortress and the relief army. The pressure to act, to launch a desperate attack on one front or the other, must have been immense. His officers likely urged immediate action, fearing being crushed between the two forces. But Caesar demonstrated the Stoic virtue of patience. Instead of a rash assault, he committed to an audacious and breathtakingly patient strategy. He ordered his men to build not one, but two massive concentric rings of fortifications around the entire city. One set of walls facing inward to contain Vercingetorix, and another set facing outward to hold off the relief force. This was not a passive wait. It was an active, grueling project of engineering and discipline conducted under the constant threat of attack. For days, his men labored, and for days, Caesar waited, watching the enemy movements, conserving his strength, and trusting in his preparations and the discipline of his legions. He waited for the Gauls to make their move, to dash themselves against his perfected defenses. When the enormous relief army finally arrived and launched its coordinated attacks, they found not a disorganized Roman camp but an impregnable fortress. Caesar's patience had transformed his army's position from one of vulnerability into one of immense strength. His delay had forced the Gauls to fight on his terms, on ground of his choosing, and against defenses he had meticulously prepared. The resulting battle was a masterpiece of defensive warfare and timely counterattacks, ending in a complete Roman victory that broke the back of the Gallic rebellion for good. Caesar's patience at Alesia wasn't hesitation. It was the decisive factor that made victory possible. This ancient understanding of patience as a strategic weapon stands in stark contrast to our modern cult of urgency, where speed is often confused with effectiveness and a rapid response is valued over a right one. We feel compelled to immediately answer every email, react to every news cycle, and seize every apparent opportunity before it disappears. This constant state of reactivity leaves us perpetually off balance, exhausting our resources on minor engagements while the main front of our lives goes undefended. The Roman general's discipline invites a moment of quiet inventory. Where in your own life do you need to cultivate this kind of strategic patience? Is it in a professional project where pushing for a quick launch might satisfy immediate anxiety but doom the venture to mediocrity, whereas a period of deliberate development and refinement could lead to a truly outstanding result? Is it in a personal relationship where pressing for a resolution or a definition forces a confrontation, while allowing time and shared experience to naturally deepen the bond might yield a far stronger connection? Or is it in a financial goal where the impatient pursuit of quick returns leads to risky decisions, while a patient, consistent strategy of compound growth builds lasting security? Patience is the courage to trust the process, to believe that your preparations and your principles will bear fruit when the moment is right, not when your anxiety demands it. It is the wisdom to understand that some things cannot be forced, only allowed to unfold. By learning to wait with purpose, you stop being a slave to the clock and become the master of your own timing. In the heat of conflict, the most dangerous enemy is often not the one across the field, but the one within our own minds, the rush to judgment. The Stoic general understood that a swift, conclusive opinion about an adversary's actions was a luxury he could not afford, for it slammed shut the door to deeper understanding and strategic advantage. This cognitive shift from judging to comprehending was a disciplined application of empathy on the battlefield, a deliberate effort to see the world through the enemy's eyes, not to sympathize but to outthink. The philosopher Epictetus, whose teachings were a guide to mental freedom, provided the essential framework for this practice. He advised his students to suspend automatic criticism, reminding them that, when you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings. For by attending to them you will quickly forget your anger. For a commander, this meant that before condemning an enemy's maneuver as foolish or brutal, he would first seek its internal logic. What objective was the opposing general truly pursuing? What constraints of supply, terrain, or politics were shaping his choices? What fears or ambitions were driving his decisions? This empathetic inquiry was not an act of weakness. It was the deepest form of military intelligence, a psychological reconnaissance that mapped the enemy's mind. A powerful illustration of this principle in action can be found in the campaigns of Scipio Africanus during the Second Punic War. Facing the legendary Hannibal, who had humiliated Rome in battle after battle, Scipio did not simply dismiss him as a savage or a trickster. Instead, he dedicated himself to understanding him. He studied Hannibal's tactics not with contempt, but with intense curiosity, analyzing his use of terrain, his deployment of cavalry, and his psychological manipulation of Roman commanders. Scipio even traveled to meet with Syphax, a Numidian king allied with Carthage, not just to negotiate, but to observe and learn from the Carthaginian military methods firsthand. This deep, non-judgmental study allowed Scipio to see the patterns in Hannibal's brilliance and, more importantly, to identify its potential weaknesses. He understood that Hannibal's strategy relied on drawing the Romans into pitched battles on his terms. Instead of judging this as arrogance and charging in again, Scipio used that understanding to craft a completely different strategy. He took the war away from Italy and into Carthage's own backyard in Africa, forcing Hannibal to fight on unfamiliar ground and, crucially, on a timeline not of his own choosing. By comprehending his opponent's logic, Scipio didn't just defeat Hannibal at Zama. He systematically dismantled the very foundation of his strategy. He leveraged empathy as a weapon. This practice of seeking understanding before passing judgment transforms conflict from a clashing of immutable forces into a dynamic dialogue of minds. The enemy is no longer a monolithic other to be destroyed, but a rational actor whose next move can be anticipated because his motivations and constraints have been thoroughly mapped. The general who judges less and understands more gains the ability to think several moves ahead, to set traps based on predicted behavior, and to exploit not just material weaknesses but psychological ones. This requires a profound humility and intellectual flexibility, a willingness to admit that the enemy's perspective, however flawed, has a coherence that must be decoded to be defeated. It is the ultimate expression of Sun Tzu's maxim to know your enemy, not just his order of battle, but the very workings of his heart and mind. This ancient discipline invites a powerful personal application in our own lives, where we so often reduce complex individuals and situations to simplistic labels of good or bad, friend or foe. Consider a colleague whose methods constantly frustrate you, a competitor in business whose success you resent, or even a family member with opposing political views. Our instinct is to judge, to categorize them as difficult, unethical, or misguided. But what if, like the Stoic general, you suspended that judgment and instead sought first to understand? How would genuinely comprehending their background, their pressures, their fears, and their intended goals change your view of this opponent? You might discover that their frustrating behavior is driven by a mandate from their manager that you knew nothing about. You might find that a business competitor's aggressive move is a sign of their own financial vulnerability rather than sheer greed. You might learn that a relative's harsh opinion is rooted in a personal experience you've never taken the time to hear. This shift doesn't require you to agree with them or abandon your own principles. It simply grants you the strategic clarity to engage with the real situation instead of the story you've told yourself about it. It replaces a dead-end conflict with a navigable challenge, turning a perceived adversary into a puzzle to be solved with understanding rather than a monster to be slain with judgment. This relentless focus on understanding the enemy's mind was only possible because the Stoic general had first mastered his own, particularly by reorienting his entire concept of success away from the unpredictable whims of fortune and onto the solid ground of his own disciplined actions. This brings us to one of the most liberating and powerful cognitive shifts of all, the intense focus on process over outcomes. In a world where victory and defeat were seen as gifts or curses from the fickle gods, the Stoic commander found his stability by concerning himself only with what was unequivocally his effort, his preparation, and his virtue. The outcome of a battle, whether his flank held, whether the enemy broke, whether the rain came, was never truly within his power. It belonged to the realm of fortune, what the Romans called fortuna, a force as unpredictable as the weather. To tie his sense of worth or success to such an external was to build his mental house on shifting sand. Marcus Aurelius, who knew the agony of waiting for news from distant fronts, constantly drilled this idea into his own mind. He wrote, "Let your chief object be to do what is at hand with perfect and simple dignity, and with a feeling of affection and freedom and justice." The action itself, performed with integrity, was the entire point. The result was merely a secondary event to be accepted with equanimity, whatever it may be. For a general, this philosophy translated into an obsessive focus on the quality of execution. He could not guarantee that his cavalry charge would break the enemy line, but he could guarantee that his cavalry was the best trained, best equipped, and most disciplined force possible. He could not control the morale of the enemy troops, but he could pour his energy into the process of building unbreakable esprit de corps within his own legions. His daily work was not about winning a future battle. It was about the meticulous present moment work of drilling formations, inspecting equipment, studying maps, and fostering loyalty. He invested everything he had into the inputs, and he detached himself from the outputs, understanding that a perfectly executed plan that ended in an honorable defeat was infinitely preferable to a sloppy, dishonorable victory won by chance. This mindset created a profound sense of psychological freedom. It allowed the general to make bold, creative decisions without the paralyzing fear of failure. If his self-worth was not on the line with every roll of the dice, he could think more clearly and act more courageously. A stunning historical example of this principle in action is the famous Battle of Cannae, viewed not from the perspective of the victorious Hannibal, but from the defeated Roman side. The Romans, despite suffering one of the most catastrophic defeats in military history, had followed what they believed was a perfect process. They had raised two massive consular armies, they had pursued the enemy with aggressive intent, and they had engaged him on favorable ground with overwhelming numerical superiority. By every metric of Roman military doctrine, they had done everything right, and yet they were annihilated by Hannibal's superior tactical genius. A commander obsessed solely with outcomes would have been utterly broken by this event. But the Roman Republic itself was steeped in a culture that, at its best, valued virtuous process over simple results. Instead of collapsing into despair, the Roman Senate did something extraordinary. They thanked the surviving consul, Varro, for not having despaired of the Republic. They acknowledged that he had fought bravely and according to the established rules of command. They honored his process even as they mirrored the horrific outcome. This cultural focus on disciplined action over desired results allowed Rome to absorb a loss that would have destroyed any other state, learn from it, adapt its tactics, and ultimately prevail in the war. The perfect process at Cannae led to a catastrophic immediate outcome, but it also set the stage for the ultimate victory because it was built on a resilient mindset that could endure defeat. This ancient wisdom directly challenges the very core of our modern, hyper-results-oriented culture. We are conditioned from a young age to focus on the scoreboard, the grade, the salary, the number of likes, the external markers of success that are only partially within our control. This constant outcome focus is a recipe for anxiety, frustration, and burnout. We tie our self-worth to a promotion we didn't get, blame external factors for a failed project, or become so afraid of a negative outcome that we never start a creative endeavor at all. The Stoic general's strategy offers a far more peaceful and ultimately more effective path. It invites you to conduct a quiet audit of your own priorities. Are you overly attached to results? Do you procrastinate on starting a fitness journey because you're fixated on the number on the scale instead of the simple process of enjoying a daily walk? Do you avoid difficult conversations because you're attached to a specific outcome of everyone agreeing with you, rather than focusing on the process of communicating your truth with clarity and compassion? Do you feel like a failure if a business venture doesn't turn a profit in its first year, ignoring the immense value in the process of building a loyal customer base and refining your product? Shifting your focus to the process liberates you from this roller coaster. The goal becomes not to win, but to play the game beautifully and with integrity. You find joy in the practice itself, the effort, the learning, the gradual improvement. The outcomes then become interesting data points, not verdicts on your worth. You can fail without being a failure because your identity is rooted in your relentless commitment to your craft, not in a trophy. This is how resilience is built, not by hoping for easier circumstances, but by finding satisfaction in the dignity of your own effort, regardless of the result. This ability to focus on the integrity of their own actions, regardless of the chaos swirling around them, was the very engine that powered the next critical cognitive shift, a quality we might simply call adaptability. But for the Stoic general, this was not a frantic, reactive flexibility born of panic. It was a calm, deliberate, and supremely rational adaptability, a product of clear thinking, not turbulent emotion. Where a less disciplined mind might see a sudden change in circumstances as a cause for alarm or a reason to abandon all plans, the Stoic commander saw it as a new set of data to be coolly assessed and integrated into a revised strategy. This deep-seated willingness to flow with reality was itself a core tenet of their philosophy. The Stoics taught that to live in accordance with nature meant to accept its fundamental law of change. To rigidly resist change was to swim against the current of the universe itself, a guaranteed path to exhaustion and frustration. The rational mind, therefore, did not fight against unexpected events. It embraced them as the new starting point for all subsequent calculations. The original plan was never sacred. It was merely the best hypothesis based on the information available at the time. When new information arrived, the hypothesis was updated. This intellectual flexibility turned the general into a master of the pivot, able to redirect his entire force with the same calm precision with which a master helmsman adjusts the sail to a shifting wind. A brilliant historical example of this rational adaptability saving an entire army can be found in the campaigns of the Roman general Lucullus during the Third Mithridatic War. Lucullus had cornered the formidable King Tigranes of Armenia near the city of Tigranoceta. Outnumbered by at least 4-1, Lucullus's initial plan relied on the discipline of his legions to withstand the initial charge of the vast but disorganized Armenian cavalry. However, as the armies drew up for battle, Lucullus made a critical observation. The heart of Tigranes' army, his heavily armored cataphract cavalry, was positioned directly opposite the Roman center. This was the obvious, expected point of impact. A general locked into his initial plan might have simply braced for the shock, but Lucullus, using pure reason in the moment, saw a hidden opportunity within this threat. He recognized that the very weight and momentum of a cataphract charge, once committed, would be almost impossible to redirect. In a breathtaking display of tactical agility, he did not change his goal to win the battle, but he completely reinvented his method in the final moments before engagement. He quietly issued new orders. Instead of meeting the charge head-on, his center would feign weakness and give ground in a controlled, fighting retreat. Meanwhile, the flanks of his compact Roman force would not try to hold the line against the enemy's numerical advantage. Instead, they would aggressively push forward, slicing into the now exposed sides of the Armenian cavalry as it plunged into the seemingly yielding Roman center. It was an incredibly risky maneuver that required perfect timing and discipline. Lucullus's rational pivot transformed the enemy's greatest strength, their massive armored charge, into their greatest weakness. The cataphracts, lured deep into the Roman lines and attacked from all sides, were trapped and slaughtered. The rest of the Armenian army, seeing their elite corps destroyed, disintegrated into a rout. Lucullus's victory was not won by a pre-written plan, but by his rational mind's supreme adaptability to the reality presented on the field that day. He didn't get emotional about the change, he got logical. This form of adaptability is the antithesis of the rigid, brittle thinking that so often leads to failure in our own lives. We create a 5-year plan and treat it as an unchangeable scripture, becoming despondent when life inevitably throws a curveball. We invest heavily in a single strategy at work and refuse to pivot even when the market signals clearly that it's not working, because to change course feels like admitting we were wrong. We cling to outdated methods and beliefs because they are familiar, even when they are no longer effective. The Stoic general's lesson is that reason is our most powerful tool for navigation in an unpredictable world. It allows us to detach from our emotional attachment to how things were supposed to be and engage clearly with how things actually are. So, how can you actively employ reason to become more adaptable in your own challenges? The next time you face an unexpected setback, a project cancellation, a sudden change in management, a personal plan that falls apart, instead of reacting with frustration, engage your rational mind. Treat it like a tactical problem. First, clearly and calmly assess the new reality without judgment. What has actually changed? Separate the facts of the new situation from the emotional story of disappointment. Next, ask what resources and options are still available to you now from this new starting point. Reason thrives on options, not on lamenting lost paths. Finally, and most crucially, be willing to scrap the original plan without viewing it as a personal failure. The old plan was right for the old reality. The new reality demands a new plan. Your ability to do this smoothly, to bend without breaking, is the hallmark of a resilient and effective mind. capable of turning any unexpected event from a disaster into a mere detour on the road to success. This unwavering commitment to rational adaptability found its ultimate expression not in complex maneuvers, but in the most fundamental and powerful leadership principle of all, the profound impact of leading by example. For the Stoic general, philosophy was not a subject to be debated in the quiet of a library. It was a code to be lived in the dust and blood of the campaign trail. They understood a timeless truth that modern leadership theory is still rediscovering, that credibility is granted not by title, but by action, and that the most inspiring speech in the world is instantly negated by a single hypocritical deed. A commander could lecture his troops for hours on the importance of courage, discipline, and endurance, but if he himself shrank from danger, indulged in luxuries they were denied, or broke his own word, his words became empty noise. The Stoic general, therefore, made his entire life a mirror of the virtues he demanded from his men. His integrity was not a private matter. It was his most public and strategic asset, the bedrock upon which he built the unshakable loyalty of his legions. The legendary Cato the Younger stands as perhaps the most uncompromising example of this principle in all of Roman history. While not a general in the traditional sense, Cato was a staunch Stoic and a political leader whose absolute, almost fanatical integrity commanded the reverence of his soldiers and the respect of even his fiercest enemies. He was famous for his extreme simplicity in dress and diet, even when holding high office, and for his refusal to engage in the commonplace political bribery and corruption of his era. During military campaigns, he carried the same weight as his soldiers, marched the same distances, and ate the same rations. His men knew with absolute certainty that Cato would never ask them to do anything he was not prepared to do himself, and that he would never sacrifice his principles for personal gain or comfort. This created a bond of trust that was impervious to the hardships of campaign life. His troops followed him not because they had to, but because they believed in the man he was. His life was his argument, and it was irrefutable. Even Plutarch noted that Cato's presence alone could inspire greater effort and discipline than any number of edicts or punishments from a more conventional commander. This philosophy of shared experience was a common thread among Rome's most effective commanders. They knew that authority granted by a Senate decree was fragile, but authority earned through shared sacrifice was ironclad. A powerful story that echoes through the centuries involves the great general Gaius Marius, whom we met earlier. During a grueling march through arid and difficult terrain, his army was suffering terribly from thirst. The troops were on the verge of collapse, their morale crumbling with every dusty step. At the height of their desperation, a water-bearer finally arrived with a small skin of fresh water and offered it to Marius, the commander. Here was a moment of supreme temptation for any leader, a chance to take a desperately needed comfort that his rank entitled him to. But Marius understood leadership by example. He did not take the water. Instead, he looked out at his parched, suffering soldiers and declared, in a voice that carried, that he could not drink while his men went thirsty. He then poured the precious water out onto the dry ground at his feet. This single, stunning act of solidarity did more to revive the spirit of his army than 1,000 canteens of water could have. It communicated a message more powerful than any speech, that their suffering was his suffering, that their fate was his fate. The men, witnessing this sacrifice, found a renewed reserve of strength and marched on with grim determination, their loyalty to Marius cemented forever. His action proved his values far more eloquently than his words ever could. This ancient standard forces a moment of uncomfortable but essential self-reflection that extends far beyond the military context. In our own roles, whether as managers, parents, teachers, or friends, we are constantly in positions of influence. We may espouse certain values like transparency, hard work, fairness, or compassion. But the critical question, the one that defines true leadership, is whether our daily behavior matches those professed values. Does your team see you working as diligently as you expect them to? Do your children see you practicing the kindness you preach to them? Do your friends experience the loyalty you claim to value? The waterskin moment may not be as dramatic as Marius's, but it appears in 1,000 subtle ways every day. It's the choice to take responsibility for a mistake instead of blaming a subordinate. It's the decision to give credit to your team instead of claiming it for yourself. It's the act of listening patiently to a concern when you are busy and stressed. These are the actions that build trust and inspire others to bring their best selves forward. Leadership is not a performance you put on for an audience. It is a character you live when you think no one is watching, because in the end, someone always is, and your integrity is the most powerful command you will ever issue. This willingness to adapt based on rational input rather than emotional reflex leads us directly to one of the most humbling yet powerful cognitive shifts a leader can make: the ability to accept criticism and dissent without a trace of personal resentment. For the Stoic general whose authority was absolute and whose decisions carried life or death consequences, this was an extraordinary display of strength. He understood that his own perspective, however experienced, was inherently limited. The soldier in the front line, the junior engineer inspecting the fortifications, the local scout who knew the terrain, each possessed a piece of the strategic puzzle that he did not. To dismiss their observations or concerns out of hand due to pride or a fragile ego was not just arrogant, it was a profound strategic failure. Feedback, especially the kind that challenged his assumptions, was not a personal attack to be defended against, but precious intelligence to be gratefully received. It was a vital tool for sharpening strategy and avoiding catastrophic error. The philosopher Seneca, whose letters were essentially a series of lessons in self-improvement addressed to a friend, pinpointed the core of this mindset. He advised, take a hard look at yourself. Is it really the critic who is wrong, or are you just reluctant to see your own faults? The wise person welcomes correction, for it is the only way to become better. For a commander, this welcoming attitude created an environment of psychological safety where subordinates felt empowered to speak truth to power, knowing their honest assessment would be heard and valued, not punished. We can see this principle in action with a figure like Scipio Africanus, the eventual conqueror of Hannibal. Before his decisive campaign in Africa, Scipio was renowned for his habit of informally walking through the camp, engaging centurions and even common legionaries in conversation. He wouldn't just issue orders from a raised platform, he would ask questions. He would present his initial plan for a maneuver and then actively solicit feedback, asking if they saw any potential problems he had missed from his command-level view. This wasn't a sign of weakness or indecision. It was a sophisticated information-gathering technique that leveraged the collective eyes and ears of his entire army. Imagine a young, low-ranking officer hesitantly approaching Scipio after one such briefing. The officer, who had been on nighttime sentry duty for weeks, might point out that the proposed route for a night march passed too close to a rocky outcrop where the sound of metal equipment clanking against stone would surely alert the enemy. A commander with a brittle ego might have taken this as an insult to his planning abilities, a challenge to his authority from a mere junior officer. But a Stoic leader like Scipio, trained to value objective data over personal pride, would have immediately seen the immense value in this observation. He would have thanked the officer, revised the route to a more sandy or soft-soiled path, and in doing so, potentially saved the entire operation from discovery and disaster. His plan became better not in spite of the criticism, but because of it. He understood that his authority was not diminished by admitting an oversight. It was enhanced by demonstrating the wisdom to correct it. This practice of depersonalizing critique required a radical separation of the idea from the individual. The Stoic general learned to treat his battle plans not as precious extensions of his own genius, but as working hypotheses meant to be stress-tested and improved by the community of his command staff. A flawed plan was not a reflection of a flawed character. It was simply a plan that needed more work. This mindset transformed the command tent from a place of sycophantic agreement into a true council of war, where the best idea could win, regardless of the rank of the person who proposed it. It fostered a culture of rigorous debate that exposed weaknesses before they were exploited by the enemy on the battlefield. The general's ultimate authority lay not in being the sole source of all good ideas, but in being the final, rational arbiter who could synthesize the best input from his team into a coherent and superior strategy. His confidence came from knowing his process was sound, not from the illusion of his own infallibility. This ancient discipline holds a powerful and immediate lesson for our modern professional and personal lives, where feedback is so often met with defensiveness and denial. We instinctively armor ourselves against critique, hearing it as a verdict on our worth rather than as useful data about our performance. The Stoic invitation is to lower those defenses and get strategically curious. How do you typically handle constructive criticism? Do you immediately begin formulating your rebuttal while the other person is still speaking? Do you dismiss feedback from those you perceive as being beneath you in status or experience? Or can you learn to receive it as the Roman general did, with gratitude and a cool, analytical mind, sifting through it for the actionable nuggets of truth that will make your next plan, your next project, or your next interaction that much stronger? The goal is not to accept all criticism as equally valid, but to create a mental space where it can be evaluated on its merits, free from the distorting heat of wounded pride. Amidst the unpredictability of war and the immense weight of command, the most effective Roman generals discovered a profound source of strength not in grand, occasional gestures, but in the quiet, unyielding power of a disciplined daily routine. This unwavering commitment to habitual practice was far more than a simple schedule. It was the foundational architecture of mental toughness, a deliberate conditioning of the mind and body to function with clarity and resilience under the most extreme pressures. While the battlefield was a realm of chaos, the general's tent, his personal habits, and his daily rituals were pockets of perfect order that he could absolutely control. This strict adherence to routine was the practical application of Stoic self-examination, a way to constantly reinforce discipline, conserve precious mental energy for critical decisions, and ensure that his foundational virtues were not just theoretical ideals, but lived realities etched into every hour of his day. By making excellence a matter of habit, the general ensured that when crisis struck, he would not have to rise to the occasion. He would simply fall back on his training, his responses becoming as automatic and reliable as breathing. We can vividly imagine the morning of a Stoic commander on campaign. Long before the first trumpet call echoed through the camp, his day would begin not with a frantic review of dispatches, but with a period of intentional solitude and mental preparation. This was his sacred time for the Stoic practice of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Seated in the quiet of his tent, he would mentally walk through the challenges the day might bring: a potential ambush on the march, a supply convoy failing to arrive, a sudden storm disrupting his battle lines. He wouldn't shy away from these thoughts. He would lean into them, visualizing his calm and rational response to each scenario. This wasn't morbid anxiety, it was a cognitive inoculation. By facing these fears in the safety of his own mind first, he drained them of their power to shock him later on the actual battlefield. Following this mental rehearsal, he might take up a stylus and wax tablet for a few moments of journaling, not to record events, but to reinforce his principles, jotting down a quote from Epictetus on controlling his perceptions or a reminder from Marcus Aurelius on his duty to his men. This practice anchored his mind in virtue before the demands of the outside world could pull it in a dozen different directions. Only after this period of mental and spiritual grounding would he turn to the practicalities of command, receiving reports from his centurions, inspecting the fortifications, and reviewing the day's marching orders. His physical routine was equally regimented. He would don his armor not as a ceremonial costume, but as a deliberate transition into his role as commander. He would likely perform the same physical exercises as his men, maintaining the fitness required to lead from the front, sharing in their physical hardship to build mutual respect and understand their limits. His meals were simple and utilitarian, often taken with his officers to foster camaraderie and discuss strategy in an informal setting. Every element of this routine, from the philosophical to the mundane, served a single purpose: to forge a leader who was mentally prepared, physically resilient, and emotionally steady, a commander whose default state was one of focused readiness. His habits were the bricks that built his inner citadel, each one adding another layer of defense against the chaos of war. This ancient understanding of habit as the bedrock of character offers a powerful lens through which to view our own modern lives, which are so often characterized by reactivity and a lack of intentional structure. We check our phones the moment we wake up, allowing the agendas and anxieties of the outside world to set the tone for our day before we've had a chance to center ourselves. We move through our hours responding to the latest email, the most urgent notification, allowing external demands to dictate our focus and drain our mental energy. The Roman general's discipline invites a moment of quiet but profound self-assessment. What single daily practice could you introduce to strengthen your own mind and build your resilience? It doesn't need to be a grand, time-consuming production. It could be as simple as committing to 5 minutes of quiet reflection with a cup of tea before you look at any screens, consciously setting an intention for your day rather than having it set for you. It might be a daily walk without headphones, allowing your mind to process and wander instead of being constantly filled with input. It could be the habit of writing down one thing you are prepared to accept without complaint each morning, actively practicing the dichotomy of control. The specific ritual is less important than the consistency and the intention behind it. Each day that you consciously choose to perform this practice, you are not just completing a task, you are casting a vote for the kind of person you wish to become. You are slowly, brick by brick, building your own unassailable inner fortitude, ensuring that when life's inevitable battles arrive, you will not be found wanting. This remarkable capacity to find strength in hardship leads us to a cognitive shift that seems almost counterintuitive: the conscious practice of gratitude in the very heart of adversity. For the Stoic general, thankfulness was not a feeling reserved for moments of victory and plenty. It was a disciplined attitude to be cultivated especially during sieges, long marches, and crushing defeats. This was not about pretending that suffering felt good or ignoring real pain. It was about actively recognizing that the most difficult challenges contained within them the very ingredients for building resilience, wisdom, and ultimate strength. It was a profound reframing of fortune itself, seeing every event, especially the unwelcome ones, as a necessary and valuable part of their training. Marcus Aurelius, who spent years leading grueling campaigns on the Danube frontier, constantly drilled this into his own mind. In his private meditations, he wrote, A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it. This was the essence of the Stoic view: to become that fire, to use every experience, every obstacle, and every moment of suffering as fuel for their own inner light. A setback was not a reason for despair, but an opportunity to practice courage. A betrayal was a chance to deepen one's self-reliance. A harsh winter campaign was an invitation to build endurance. By expressing gratitude for these trials, the general performed a powerful mental alchemy, transforming leaden hardship into golden character. We can see this principle in action during one of the most famous sieges in Roman history, the defense of Placentia during the civil wars. The forces of the Emperor Vespasian were trapped within the city walls, surrounded by a vastly superior army. Supplies dwindled to near nothing, morale plummeted, and the constant threat of assault hung over the defenders like a shroud. In this dire situation, a commander could have easily given in to despair or focused solely on the grim reality of their predicament. But the Stoic-trained legate in charge understood the psychological power of perspective. Each evening, he reportedly gathered his centurions and, instead of dwelling on their shortages, led them in a brief reflection on what they still had to be thankful for. He expressed gratitude for the high, strong walls that had so far held against the battering rams. He gave thanks for the discipline of the soldiers who stood their watch without complaint. He even found a grim gratitude for the enemy themselves, acknowledging that their relentless pressure was forging his legion into the hardest steel Rome had ever seen. This wasn't empty positivity. It was a tactical redirection of focus from what was lacking to what was present, from weakness to latent strength. This practice, repeated daily, acted as a psychological bulwark as important as any physical wall. It prevented the creeping hopelessness that could destroy an army from within far more effectively than any external attack. The soldiers, hearing their leader find reasons for gratitude in the midst of such hardship, began to mirror his attitude. Their complaints lessened, their resolve hardened, and they held the city until relief forces finally arrived. Their gratitude did not change the facts of the siege, but it fundamentally changed their experience of it, turning a potential catastrophe of spirit into a legendary stand of resolve. This ancient practice invites a deeply personal and transformative application in our own lives. We are often conditioned to view gratitude as a passive response to good fortune, something we feel when we get the promotion, when the sun is shining, or when everything is going according to plan. The Stoic general's challenge is to actively wield gratitude as a tool for resilience, especially when the plan falls apart. It is the conscious decision to look at a difficulty not as a punishment or a mere obstacle, but as a teacher. So, ask yourself the question that would have been familiar in any Stoic command tent. What difficulty are you genuinely grateful for? Perhaps you are grateful for that demanding project at work that stretched your abilities to their limit because it forced you to develop new skills and revealed a capacity for endurance you didn't know you possessed. Maybe you are thankful for a past failure or rejection because it steered you away from a path that was wrong for you and toward one that was authentically yours. You might even find a thread of gratitude for a period of personal loss or grief, not for the pain itself, but for the depth of compassion and understanding it carved into your character, making you a more empathetic friend, partner, or parent. This is not about denying the real pain of these experiences, but about reclaiming your power from them by focusing on the strength they fostered. By practicing gratitude for the struggle, you complete the alchemical process, ensuring that no hardship is ever wasted and that every challenge, no matter how difficult, contributes to the person you are becoming. This relentless focus on gratitude for the struggle was only possible because the Stoic general had first mastered the art of cutting through the overwhelming noise of war to identify the single, vital thread that demanded his attention. This brings us to the cognitive shift of achieving clarity through simplification, a disciplined process of stripping away the non-essential to reveal the core issue at the heart of any complex situation. On the ancient battlefield, information was often scarce, but at the command level, it could also be paradoxically overwhelming, a deluge of conflicting reports, rumors, and potential threats. The general's greatest skill was not in gathering more data, but in ruthlessly discarding the 99% that was irrelevant, distracting, or merely speculative, allowing him to focus his entire being on the 1% that truly mattered. This practice was the ultimate application of the Stoic focus on what is within our power, applied to the realm of thought itself. The philosopher Epictetus, whose teachings were a guide to mental freedom, provided the essential filter for this process. He advised, the chief task in life is simply this: to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control, and which have to do with the choices I actually control. For a commander, this meant that the seductive gossip about an enemy general's personal life was an external to be ignored, while the confirmed report of his army's location was a choice to be acted upon. The weather was an external, the preparedness of his men for any weather was a choice. By applying this ruthless filter, the general transformed a paralyzingly complex web of possibilities into a short list of actionable, controllable decisions. A powerful historical example of this principle in action can be found in the decision-making of Gaius Julius Caesar during his campaigns in Gaul. On numerous occasions, Caesar was faced with a dizzying array of intelligence from scouts, allied tribes, and deserters, much of it contradictory. A lesser commander might have hesitated, waiting for a clearer, more complete picture to emerge, a delay that could prove fatal. Caesar, however, was a master of simplification. He would absorb the torrent of information and then immediately apply a brutal filter, asking himself a series of clarifying questions. What is the one objective that, if achieved, makes all other factors irrelevant? What is the one core vulnerability of my enemy that I can exploit? What is the one action I can take right now that moves me toward that objective? He would discard any intelligence that did not directly help answer those questions. For instance, if his objective was to bring a particular Gallic army to battle before they could unite with reinforcements, he would focus solely on reports about their current location and route. He would ignore tantalizing but unverified rumors about internal dissent in their ranks or the personal ambitions of their chieftains. Those were externals outside his immediate control. The only thing that mattered was the choice of where and when to intercept them. This radical simplification allowed him to act with stunning speed and decisiveness, often catching his enemies off guard because they were still pondering a dozen different variables that Caesar had already dismissed as noise. His genius lay in knowing what to ignore. This practice of strategic simplification is perhaps more vital today than ever before. We live in an age of infinite information and endless optionality, a constant barrage of emails, messages, news alerts, and social media feeds that fragment our attention and cloud our judgment. We are presented with 1,000 different paths every day, and the pressure to consider them all can lead to a state of paralyzing anxiety, often called analysis paralysis. We complicate our lives by trying to do too much, to track too much, and to worry about too much. The Stoic general's discipline is a powerful antidote to this modern condition. It is an invitation to cut through the clutter and ask the same clarifying questions. What is my one true objective in this situation? Not 10 objectives, one. What are the one or two actions that are entirely within my control that will directly advance me toward that goal? Everything else is a potential distraction, an external to be acknowledged but not allowed to consume your focus and energy. This isn't about living a simple life, it's about thinking with simple, devastating clarity. So, look at the landscape of your own life right now, with all its complexities and demands. What can you simplify? Perhaps it is your schedule, cluttered with meetings that do not align with your core responsibilities, that you can begin to decline or delegate. Perhaps it is a project that has become bloated with unnecessary features, that you can streamline by returning to the original, single problem it was designed to solve. Maybe it is a personal goal that feels overwhelming because you are focusing on a dozen different metrics of success when only one truly matters to you. The power of simplification lies in its ability to free up immense reserves of mental energy and directed effort. By consciously choosing to ignore the non-essential, you are not missing out, you are zeroing in. You are moving from being a passive recipient of the world's chaos to being the active author of your own focused, purposeful action. This final cognitive shift redefines the very essence of courage, moving it from a mythical quality possessed by the fearless to a rational, accessible choice available to anyone, even in the grip of terror. For the Stoic general, courage was never the absence of fear. That would be a physiological impossibility and a strategic liability. True courage, vertus to the Romans, was the disciplined ability to feel the full, gut-wrenching clutch of fear, and yet choose to take the correct action anyway, not because of a surge of emotion, but because reason and duty demanded it. It was action guided by principle, not passion. The great orator and statesman Cicero, who lived through some of Rome's most tumultuous civil wars, captured this Stoic ideal perfectly when he wrote, "The brave man is not he who feels no fear, but he whose noble soul subdues its fear and bravely faces the danger which duty points out." This was the crucial distinction. The courageous general was not immune to the sight of the enemy horde, the sound of the battle cry, or the natural impulse for self-preservation. His body would tremble, his heart would pound, his mind would scream at him to flee. His triumph was not in silencing that scream, but in hearing it, acknowledging it, and then deliberately choosing to override it because his rational mind had calculated that the risk was necessary for a greater good. The protection of his men, the survival of the Republic, the fulfillment of his sworn duty. We can see this principle enacted in its most raw and powerful form in the conduct of a centurion or a junior officer leading a charge across a blood-soaked field. The decision to advance was not a blind, berserker rage. It was often the culmination of a rapid, internal calculus. The soldier would feel the terror, see the spears of the enemy line glinting in the sun, and hear the cries of the wounded. But his Stoic training would kick in. He would separate the impression of certain death from the judgment of it. He would ask himself not, "Am I afraid?" but "What is my duty in this moment?" His reason would provide the answer. His duty was to maintain the cohesion of the line, to protect the man to his left and right, to advance the standard, to execute the plan he had been entrusted with. His courage was the space between the fear and the action, a space filled not with emotion, but with reasoned commitment to a purpose larger than his own survival. He moved his feet forward not because he felt brave, but because he had rationally decided that this was the right thing to do. This made his courage far more reliable and resilient than any emotion-based heroism. Feelings are fickle and can evaporate in an instant, but a choice made from principle can be sustained through unimaginable hardship. A legendary historical example that embodies this rational courage is the story of the Spartans' stand at Thermopylae, a tale the Romans themselves admired and studied. King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, along with their allies, chose to make their stand at the narrow pass, fully aware that the Persian army of Xerxes was of an overwhelming, unimaginable size. This was not a decision made in a fit of patriotic fervor or a reckless thirst for glory. It was a cold, calculated, strategic choice. Their reasoning was clear. By holding the pass for as long as possible, they could delay the Persian advance, allowing the main Greek forces time to prepare and the fleet to engage the Persian navy. They understood their duty was to be the sacrificial pawn that protected the king, the survival of Greece itself. Each day they fought, each Persian soldier they killed, was a rational step toward that strategic objective. Their courage was in the daily recommitment to that reasoned choice in the face of certain death. They were afraid, of course they were, but their fear was not their master. It was merely data their rational minds had already accounted for and accepted. Their legendary bravery was at its core the ultimate expression of Stoic virtue, acting in accordance with duty and reason, regardless of the terrifying cost. This redefinition of courage is perhaps the most immediately applicable of all the Stoic shifts for our modern lives. We may not face literal spears and shields, but we face a daily battlefield of moral and psychological challenges that demand the same kind of rational bravery. It is the courage to speak up in a meeting when you see a flawed plan unfolding, even though your voice shakes and you fear the judgment of your peers. It is the courage to have that difficult conversation with a loved one that you have been avoiding, not because you are unafraid of the conflict, but because you know it is necessary for the health of the relationship. It is the courage to start a new venture, to change careers, or to pursue a creative passion, not because you are certain of success, but because your reason tells you it is the right path for your growth, and you refuse to be ruled by the fear of failure. This is the Stoic challenge that brings our journey through the Roman mind to a powerful and personal conclusion. Look at the landscape of your own life with its quiet battles and personal fronts. Where can you choose to act with this kind of rational courage today? Where is fear currently holding you back from doing what you know, in your reasoned heart, is the right thing to do? The goal is not to eliminate the fear, but to acknowledge it, and then to take that one step forward anyway, guided by your principles and your purpose. In that conscious, deliberate choice, you are not just overcoming a personal obstacle, you are standing in the long tradition of those ancient commanders, proving that the most brilliant tactics are those we use to master ourselves. And so we arrive at the end of our campaign through the mind of the Roman general, having mapped the 25 cognitive shifts that transformed these leaders into legends of tactical brilliance. We've journeyed from the foundational acceptance of the dichotomy of control to the rational courage that moves forward despite fear. These are not merely historical curiosities or abstract philosophical concepts. They are a complete operating system for the mind, a toolkit of mental disciplines that enabled ordinary men to achieve extraordinary things under the most unimaginable pressure. The brilliance of a Scipio Africanus, the resilience of a Cato, the strategic patience of a Fabius Maximus, these were not flukes of personality. They were the direct results of a conscious, daily practice of Stoic principles, a relentless training of perception, judgment, and action that turned the chaos of the battlefield into a canvas for virtuous and effective command. Their greatest victories were won not against the Gauls or the Carthaginians, but within the silent, uncharted territory of their own thoughts, long before the first sword was ever drawn. The profound truth this exploration reveals is that these shifts are not locked in the past. The battlefields we face today may look different: boardrooms instead of open fields, social conflicts instead of phalanxes, personal struggles instead of sieges, but the human mind confronting adversity has not changed. The same cognitive biases that clouded a general's assessment of a scout's report now cloud our judgment when we receive a stressful email. The same temptation to focus on uncontrollable outcomes that could break an army's morale now fuels our anxiety about the economy or our career. The principles of Stoicism, forged in the literal fires of ancient warfare, provide a timeless and shockingly relevant framework for navigating the complexities of modern leadership, decision-making, and personal resilience. Whether you are guiding a team through a difficult quarter, steering your family through a challenge, or simply striving to build a more resilient and purposeful inner life, these 25 shifts offer a path to greater clarity, calm, and effectiveness. They teach us that the external world will always be unpredictable, but our internal world can be an unassailable citadel of strength. The Stoic philosopher Seneca, whose wisdom has guided us through many of these shifts, offered a final, powerful reflection on the purpose of this entire endeavor. He wrote, "Philosophy is no trick to catch the public. It is not devised for show. It is a matter of more than words. It is a healing of the mind, an essential medicine for the soul." This is what we have been exploring together, not a set of intellectual tricks, but a form of mental medicine. It is the healing of our reactive impulses, the strengthening of our rational core, and the cultivation of a soul fortified against life's inevitable hardships. The Roman generals did not study Stoicism to become better debaters. They practiced it to become better leaders, better decision-makers, and ultimately, better human beings, capable of bearing the immense weight of their duty without being crushed by it. Your journey, however, does not end with this video. The most important step begins now. The sheer number of principles can feel overwhelming, so I encourage you not to try and master them all at once. Instead, I invite you to choose just one. Review these 25 shifts and identify a single cognitive tool that resonates most deeply with a challenge you are currently facing. Perhaps it is the practice of pausing before you assent to a frightening impression, creating that vital space between event and reaction. Maybe it is the discipline of focusing only on your process and effort, detaching your self-worth from an unpredictable outcome. It could be the decision to actively seek understanding before passing judgment on a difficult person in your life. For the next week, make that one shift your personal campaign. Apply it deliberately in your daily interactions and observe the subtle but powerful difference it makes in your clarity and your peace of mind. True mastery, as the Romans knew, is built not in a day, but through the consistent daily application of principle. If you found this exploration of ancient wisdom valuable for your modern life, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. We are dedicated to unearthing more of these timeless ideas from the Stoics and other philosophical traditions, and translating them into practical tools you can use to build resilience, enhance your leadership, and live a more purposeful and peaceful life. Thank you for joining me on this march through history. May your own inner citadel remain unbreached.